wanted to talk to you guys today about the current proposals for marlin that have been laid out by Fisheries New Zealand that would permit commercial fishers to land and sell dead marlin in New Zealand when they've been caught by monitored longline vessels. But I guess to fully understand the implications of these proposals, why it's really important to recreational fishers, for example, and the public, we need to grasp a better understanding of the history, how we got here, and I think you guys are the best people to talk to about because you've been in the industry for so long. So if we start with you both introducing yourselves and talk about who you are and how long you've been in the industry for, I think that would be a good start, and how the importance of marlin in New Zealand into the recreational fishery.
Oh, I'll start. I'm Pete Saul. I got involved in the marlin fishery in 1972 when I started work with the Ministry of Fisheries at that time in Northland, and became interested in striped marlin, started collecting biological information at various tournaments just for my own interest, and that sort of branched out over time. And then we started a tag and release program in 1975, which gradually got bigger and bigger. And then John and I, when we became redundant from the ministry, we formed Blue Water Marine Research and carried on similar sort of projects. I branched out and became a charter boat skipper and took divers and anglers out fishing and diving for quite a few years. So, and I've been involved as the records officer for the Sport Fishing Council for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, intimately involved in this whole process.
Yeah, and so you've been based up here for pretty much that whole time?
Yep, I was based in Whangarei the whole time, yeah. Nice. And now I live on the coast at Tutukaka.
Beautiful spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I joined MAF, or Fisheries New Zealand, in 1987, and with Pete in Pete's office as a technician, and gradually took on a bit more responsibility as my hours went up, because it was part-time to start with, and helped with the game fish tagging program while it was run by MAF at the time. And also Pete started the East Northland Charter Boat Survey. It was a postal survey, it was cheap to run, it was an annual survey, but we collected data on the number of days they fished and the number of marlin they caught. And that information has been quite a long time series, since 1975, really quite useful in monitoring striped marlin abundance in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. In 1997 we got made redundant and decided to form Blue Water Marine Research, and we kept that charter boat survey going even though there wasn't any funding for 3 or 4 years, until Fisheries New Zealand picked it up, and we updated it, and they started the billfish logbook program, which we've been running for 19 years now, collecting information on striped marlin catch rates in New Zealand from recreational fishers.
Yeah.
And that information is used in the Southwest Pacific Stock Assessment, and has also been quite useful to keep the project going. Mm-hmm. It has relevance, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the recreational fishery is quite big for marlin here in New Zealand, and it's been going on for, I think I had a bit of a research, and one of the first marlin was caught in 1914. Mm. So it's been going on for quite a long time. How do you think that, in terms of tourism and the importance for marlin, because not everyone catches a marlin, but it's such a pivotal species, and we're up here in Northland, and there's marlin on your shirt, and there's marlin all over the club and different brands and that sort of thing. But how is that kind of, I guess, across all of New Zealand, or why is it such an important fishery, do you think?
It's quite interesting historically, because it's actually just over 100 years since the government of the day decided to promote New Zealand as a world-class striped marlin fishery. sport fishery, and they got a American author called Zane Grey to come out here, who was also an avid angler, and it was tremendously successful, and it really promoted fishing in, mostly on the northeast coast of the North Island at that stage. If you think about how it developed over the years, places like Whangaroa, Bay of Islands, Tutukaka, very small economies, not much going on, huge input financially into those, those communities. And I got into it in the early 70s when there was no fish, very, very few fish. But people still used to go fishing, and tremendous for these little areas, you know.
Yeah, just that experience of going out and going game fishing.
Yeah, when they come in and they're spending money in these areas that wouldn't be spent there otherwise, you know.
And then what happened in the late 70s and early 80s, the catch rates went right up. We had a couple of warm years and the fishing was really good, and there was a lot of private boats, and there was a bit of money around. A lot of private boats started game fishing. So it moved from a charter boat based fishery where you hired the gear, an experienced skipper who had all the rods and reels, to a private boat fishery where you could have your own boat and go fishing when you wanted to, and enter contests, and there were quite a lot of good fishing contests around in those days for marlin. And we get the largest striped marlin in the world. There was international anglers coming over here. New Zealand Sport Fishing Council organised an international fishing tournament, and it moved around the clubs. The anglers would move around the clubs and sort of based it on a Hawaiian billfish international tournament that was very successful. We get the largest striped marlin in the world here. We've got almost all the world records for the heaviest fish by line class. There's a few records for light line fishing overseas, but and at this club we've got the world record striped marlin, a mount on the wall at 224 kilos, caught in 1987, I think. It's a world-class fishery, and people enjoyed the challenge of going out. They don't always catch fish, but when you do, it's really exciting.
It's rewarding, yeah. So I guess that transition from charter vessels to more private, that's what it's like now. Like there's a lot more charter, it replicates kind of where we are at now. There's private vessels compared to those charter vessels. It's less charter vessels now.
There's thousands of boats nowadays.
Yeah.
What happened is in the late 70s and 80s, trailer boats came into the fishery. And when I started fishing, it was nearly all slow launches. And now it's all fast trailer boats. And they're highly mobile. They'll go anywhere in the country where the fish are. And it's accessible to almost anybody. You don't have to have $1 million to buy a boat. All you need is a boat with a tinny with an outboard and a couple of mates and a life jacket each.
Yeah,
and away you go.
Yeah, lots more people contributing into the economy with fishing tackle and needing all the best lures and that sort of thing.
But the other thing that happened, which triggered the billfish moratorium, was in the mid-1980s. There were 3 really bad years in a row. We had warm water and no fish, and the enthusiasm that was built up in the few years before that all of a sudden got stymied, and they said, something's wrong here, what's going wrong, have a closer look at it. And at the time we had the Japanese and Korean foreign licence fleet tuna longlining with great big vessels that would set 30 miles of longline gear every day and work in series up the coast. And in some years they were catching 6,000 striped marlin off our coasts, and we said, well, that's obviously one of the problems here. Let's try and do something about it. And at the time there was this push from some of the new entrants into the fishery that were excited about the fishery, private people, and a little bit of political will to try and sort something out and maybe shift a foreign licence fishery for tuna into a domestic fishery for tuna. And so we had support from the commercial fishers to try and change the foreign licence system. And that's resulted in 1987 of the billfish moratorium being introduced for 3 years by the Minister Colin Moyle.
Yeah. So it was the public. So it was a combination between the public, domestic commercial fishers, and the government who came together and they put in place a billfish moratorium because they recognised that there was an issue. And non-commercial fishers were being impacted by, or felt that they were being impacted by the level of catch. The catch rates were declining.
Yeah, I think Pete was involved in some of the discussions back then, and there was a legal challenge as well, wasn't there?
There was a legal challenge. There was a fellow called Ray Smith who bankrolled the challenge to the tune of $100,000 to take the government to court because they perceived that the regulations at the time were allowing these foreign boats to ruin our recreational fishery. Bearing in mind at that stage there was no domestic longline fishery, it was all foreign boats, and most of them were licensed. The Japanese boats were all licensed to fish for southern bluefin tuna, and they were mostly fishing off the South Island and the lower North Island. But I started looking at the records and it turned out that some of them were staying in the north all the time. And the Korean boats were supposedly albacore boats, and they were fishing up here all the time as well. So there was actually a very small number of boats catching nearly all the so-called bycatch.
So was there an agreement with the billfish moratorium, or was it just that it would become, or that foreign vessels would move out and then the domestic, and then there would be prioritisation given to commercial longline vessels?
Well, by a stroke of good fortune, Colin Moyle was the MP for the Bay of Islands. And so he knew about the fishery, he understood how it worked and how important it was to that area. And so he supported the idea of excluding the foreign boats. And he thought about it and then he said, yeah, I'll give you what you want, but in return what you've got to do is support the game fish tagging program and tag and release at least 50% of your catch every year, which was a bit of a shock to some people because Kiwis are used to going out catching fish to eat, and having to let these fish go was a bit of a leap of faith for some people, I guess you could say. Even today, there's some people that aren't terribly enthusiastic about it, but the vast majority of people are. And we agreed at the time, yep, we'll do it, Minister, and we did, and we've stuck to that agreement right to the present day and exceeded it every year.
Yeah, so how long would the tagging program had been in place before the moratorium came into place?
Well, it was implemented in 1975, took off a bit in 76, but mostly it was yellowtail kingfish and sharks that were tagged to start with a small number of marlin. We tried hard to convince people to do it, but this situation gave them the impetus they needed, you know, the kick in the behind, and it took off and it's never looked back.
And then that maintained marlin, all marlin species, as bycatch only for commercial fishers, and they had to release.
No, they weren't allowed to land any billfish at all at that stage.
The billfish moratorium only applied to the north half of the North Island.
Okay.
And it was seasonal. But then after the review process, after 3 years, they brought in a regulation that it was a national ban on billfish, all billfish, as commercial species, so as a recreational only species. And it was year round. And so initially broadbill swordfish were part of the ban, but the domestic longliners who had started fishing for tuna were catching a bycatch of broadbill swordfish, and argued that there was they needed to be able to keep some of these fish to be profitable or whatever. And there was quite a lot of catch. They were catching quite a few of them, and they were worth a lot of money. And initially, we signed a memorandum of understanding. The Sport Fishing Council and the Recreational Fishing Council and the industry signed an agreement saying that they were allowed to take 40 tonnes green weight of broadbill per year. And that was sort of a voluntary catch limit. And they exceeded that, and then it went up to 80 tonnes in 1995. They were sort of pushed it up a bit because there were a few more fishers coming into the fishery.
Yeah, so that was a part of the agreement. Recreational fishers tagged the 50%, no landing of any marlin, but then they could catch a certain amount of swordfish.
Yeah.
So how come? What was it? Was that just kind of a tit for tat? We'll maintain our side of the agreement, and you can. Why was it that swordfish was able to be landed rather than marlin?
Well, back then we used to meet regularly with industry, and we actually had very good relationships, and we were happy for there to be a New Zealand successful tuna fishery, and we wanted the marlin fishery. And in the end, there was a compromise reached over swordfish, and we figured if we could help make them viable, then it was a win-win for everybody. But unfortunately, some guys started targeting, and even though they denied it, the catches went up and up and up, started using light sticks, started setting shallow, and it was clear they were targeting, even though I had arguments with my bosses about that. They denied it vehemently, but it was perfectly obvious that it was true. And so we can just see this all happening again, It's a toe in the door, and then it's a foot in the door, and then it's a whole leg in the door, and next thing you're through the door, and I'd just be horrified to see that happen.
Yeah, like I think I've seen that graph. It goes, you can definitely see the catch limits, not the catch limits, the catches increase for broadbill over the years, and then it got entered, because it didn't start off as being entered into the quota management system, so it's similar to the proposal for marlin that's happening now. Was it entered into the quota management system at a later date because it was clearly a target fishery, or what then proceeded
it became a significant fishery. Yeah. It was over 800 tonnes, 900 tonnes, and that's a significant fishery, and that was supposedly bycatch, which wasn't bycatch at all. It was targeted. And we were having meetings, Sport Fishing Council were having meetings with industry saying, you've got to rein in this illegal targeting. You're not allowed to target non-quota species like this. We used to have an agreement that said that you would limit your catch, and you haven't done that. And they said, well, we'll swap some catch limits for striped marlin, and that just was a no-go area for Sport Fishing Council. In the 1990s, there wasn't a lot of recreational catch of swordfish. You had to go out at night and drift around and way offshore, and it was pretty uncomfortable and long. Pete and I did quite a few nights out there.
Did quite a bit of it.
And had some success, but it was hard work, and so there wasn't a lot of recreational catch of swordfish. But there was quite a high commercial catch. Bycatch.
So it was like could be a viable commercial fishery, but it wasn't a popular non-commercial fishery.
It was extremely high profile to catch a broadbill swordfish because it was rare and they're big, strong fish, and they were.
To be fair, we had no idea there were so many of them, and that they were much closer to shore than what we'd been driving over them for years and not even knowing they were there.
And then one year they caught around 900 tonnes, I think, and then it...
Well, it was introduction of a different fishing method for us that made the difference. We discovered if you fish deep for them during the day, they were quite easy to target. And there's a booming fishery now, and it's great, I've given up because it's too easy now.
Too easy to go broadbill. So there's also, while we're talking about similar fisheries, there's a striped marlin fishery in Australia, and or marlin fishery in Australia, and they target marlin over there now. How do you think the Australian fishery compares to in New Zealand, and the management over there to what's being proposed, and is there anything that could happen here that is happening over there at the moment? Because that used to be a non-target, they didn't target fishery marlin over there before, but now they do, and I don't know much about it, but how...
Yeah, the East Australian tuna and billfish fishery is what it's called now. They're not allowed to catch or sell black marlin and blue marlin. They were allowed a bycatch of striped marlin, and that bycatch grew similar to what happened here with broadbill swordfish, is that it grew from year to year to year, and it grew because the fishers changed where they were fishing. They were fishing further down the coast where the striped marlin were in the summer and catching more of them, and there was pretty obvious signs that they were targeting as well, because there was a big argument about it, and eventually it became permitted to target striped marlin in Australia, the eastern coast of Australia, and now that fishery is the largest target fishery for striped marlin in the southwest Pacific. Mm-hmm. So the Australians are taking more striped marlin in the summer down the coast off New South Wales, and in spring in the spawning grounds sort of in the Coral Sea, or adjacent to the Coral Sea. So that's what can happen if you open the door, I think. It's certainly the concern from Sport Fishing Council, what can happen.
Yeah, because I guess we only have that to base it on. Because was that when has that kind of grown over? Is that fairly recent, or?
There was a big jump up in the sort of mid-1990s. Mm-hmm.
So around a similar time.
Around a similar time, yeah. And currently in New Zealand, there's very little overlap between the tuna longline fishery and the summer marlin fishery for recreational fishers. And the concern is, as the climate and the sea surface temperatures increase, the habitat for striped marlin's moving south towards the poles, and there's going to be more overlap with striped marlin habitat, or all marlin habitat for that matter, and the commercial fishery, and we're just going to see increased overlap between, and gear conflict, I guess is what you'd call it, between the two sectors.
I heard some horror stories from Australia where guys were setting long lines right through the recreational fleets when they're fishing, so that's the last thing you want.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be out trolling for a fish and then go straight through
someone hauling dead marlin up on a long line, yeah.
Yeah. Talked about other fisheries that have the proposals kind of replicate. Swordfish, that was a bycatch only to start off with. And was that, so with the moratorium and the memorandum of understanding, none of that was legislated. That was all just an voluntary agreement and understanding. And then now
it was regulated eventually.
It was.
The regulations behind it, but then there was an annual review process where you went in and discussed, how things were going, and looked at the catch rates and things like that. And it was, it was a period when we had these tagging tournaments in the Bay of Islands, and the Ministry of Fisheries, the Minister of Fisheries would turn up. It had sponsorship from DOC, and the Minister from Department of Conservation would turn up and go out fishing with and we had sponsorship from the Fishing Industry Council. And some of the Moana fisheries was a sponsor for a while, and they would have sort of their chief executives and things come along and go game fishing and mingle with us and sort of socialise, and there was this social capital built up. There was a bit of, goodwill between the parties, but it fell apart pretty much, and I wrote a paper with Kim Walsh actually and presented it to a World Recreational Fishing Conference on how the arguments about broadbill swordfish broke down the social structure, the social capital we had with industry over the tuna and billfish fishery.
Okay, so are those the arguments that led to no longer having a memorandum of understanding anymore? And then I guess that's kind of when it broke down, no more annual meetings, but you meet at meetings with Fisheries New Zealand.
Then in the late 1990s, we had almost 3 years of meetings to develop the highly migratory fisheries plan. The ministry decided that they were going to have fisheries plans for inshore, for deep water, for shellfish and highly migratory species. The highly migratory species plan did get across the line. A lot of the others didn't. They got too complicated. And in those meetings, there was a lot of argument between commercial reps and the recreational reps about striped marlin being able to retain dead striped marlin, and on what, how would you guarantee that it was only dead striped marlin that were being kept, and how would you stop it becoming the foot in the door, as Pete was saying, to something more permanent and more targeted, if you like. And in the end, that we couldn't reach an agreement on that. But in the highly migratory fisheries plan, there's a clause that says that if there's disputes between commercial and recreational fishers, there'll be a negotiated solution. And that was about striped marlin. That was to cover the striped marlin argument. And then in 2013, there was a proposal that came from the ministry and the minister to introduce striped marlin into the quota management system. And there was a series of meetings about that, which were quite hotly contested, I believe. And when the public got to see what the proposal was, there was a campaign run by Sport Fishing Council at the time that flooded the minister's email inbox with 3,000 emails opposing this introduction of striped marlin to the quota management system. It was very clear that it wasn't going to wash, and it was at the time quite quickly shut down. But the issue hasn't gone away, obviously. And now, without any negotiation, without any consultation, we've just had this proposal dropped on us in 2025.
So that clause to navigate conflicts between recreational and commercial for striped marlin, is that still a clause within
it was for any dispute, but
for
yes,
any dispute, yeah.
It's still there, it's still in the plan, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then so back to the campaign in 2013, is that the driver for those proposals, are they similar to the proposals that are occurring now? So that's the waste of, there's a wastage issue of landing, not being able to land dead marlin, and also somewhat of an economic driver as well. Was that similar, the same kind of driver back in 2000 and years leading up to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, the argument was that it's no benefit to anyone to release these fish. They're not going to survive, they're not going to earn any money, they're not going to be caught by recreational fishers because they're coming up dead. And there was proposals to donate them free to charity or whatever, just to be able to land them, but you knew that that was just going to be the
a foot in a door of another door.
Another door that that would eventually lead to some commercialisation of the striped or the billfish fishery. That was only striped marlin back then. The new proposal is black marlin and blue marlin and probably shortbill spearfish as well, coming out off the regulations.
But having said that, it's only going to be striped marlin that's in significant numbers.
Yeah.
If that's the case.
And it's probably got the potential to have some value, although the Australians were saying that the Japanese market for striped marlin is much better just pre-spawning when they're in really fat condition, and the flesh goes more of a pinky colour. Mm-hmm. They get a bit of colour in the striped marlin in the flesh, and that's when it has value in Japan. But we're getting fish after the spring spawning season coming here to feed, so that's a foraging ground, summer foraging ground for striped marlin, and they come down here to put condition on. So in the early season they're pretty skinny and probably not acceptable on the Japanese market. I don't know where they'll be selling them.
Yeah, because can you imagine it being there being much of a domestic market for marlin?
Well, what you're doing then is you're opening the door to illegal fishing. Mm-hmm. The Sport Fishing Council was at great pains to make sure that none of its members would illegally sell fish. And in the past, the odd person has been caught selling fish, which they're not allowed to do, of course, as recreational fishers. And so you're creating a situation where a black market becomes possible. That's the last thing we want. You know, if it was up to me, I would ban the sale of marlin in New Zealand altogether, completely.
So importing...
Not allowed at sale. At the moment, there's nothing to stop you importing cheap marlin from Fiji, which has been done in the past. I think it's mainly blue marlin. And I've seen it for sale here, and people say, oh, I went down the supermarket and bought some marlin the other day. And I went, what? Went in there and checked. And it was a shoddy product for a start, but once again, it opens the door for illegal sales. Don't want that.
I think I would prefer marlin caught by a friend than marlin purchased at Pack
I'd
and
love
Save.
to catch you one.
Yeah. So with the 2000 campaign, so that was the Hands Off My Marlin campaign, Hands Off Our Marlin campaign. What do you think was the key driver for the minister at the time to be like, okay, no, we won't go ahead, because that campaign only went for a couple of days and it was quite short, and then it was ended. People found out about the proposals, and then the proposals were gone. And what do you think? I guess you said that there was thousands of emails flooding but they get thousands of emails and other submissions. What do you think was, I guess, a key driver in that situation for them to not go ahead with the proposals to enter it into the quota management system?
Well, I guess it was a bit of history. It was a bit of a combination of a lack of public support, and it might have been a timing issue as well. Mm-hmm. And there just wasn't the benefit to the government, to industry, to everyone else was not great. The actual economic benefit was not significant enough for a government to
handle the PR disaster.
To manage this uproar that had all of a sudden come along. So I guess it was a lack of political will, I guess, to drive it, whereas maybe with this minister we're seeing a little bit more will to take opposition in his stride and just move on.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what kind of a, I guess in the current proposals there isn't an estimation of how much money they could potentially make off marlin, and if there is a potential market out there for them to sell, there must be if there's an expression of interest by commercial fishers to land dead marlin, you would think. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pushing for so long, for so many years.
Part of the issue is that the profitability of tuna fishing has come down. I mean, the prices they were getting for good southern bluefin tuna, like $30 a kilo, it's now down to $7 or $8 a kilo for most fish they're catching. The odd ones might get more, but there's just that much bluefin tuna on the international market now as the stocks have recovered in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. Japanese market likes to buy tuna off the Japanese boats that they don't want to use, pay high prices for fish coming from international fleets.
Mm-hmm. So you've both worked in the industry and with marlin and other game fish species for a long time now. How your science backgrounds and how has that contributed, and other recreational data contributed to our knowledge of the fishery, and what sort of research has the public and yourselves taken part in?
We started, saw the value in the long-term catch records from the clubs since 1925. We've got club records of individual fish with dates and boats and weights, and that has 30 years of records before there was any commercial fishing for marlin or tuna for that matter, any longline fishing, industrial fishing in the Southwest Pacific. And so there's a really good record of what the size and abundance of fish were prior to fishing. And in the striped marlin, Southwest Pacific striped marlin stock assessment, the change in average weight of New Zealand striped marlin from club records was used to inform the decline in the population in the stock. Because when they used the Japanese catch per unit effort information, the stock declined really fast in the first 5 years, and it was just unbelievable that you could have 1,000 tonnes of catch and the stock collapsed, basically. Well, not collapsed, but reduced by half. So they didn't believe that was giving a good signal, and they used the average weight of striped marlin caught in the recreational fishery as a way of informing the model of that initial decline. And so that was quite useful. And then the charter boat and catch per unit effort from the recreational fishery that Pete started was also a long time series, longer than the New Zealand or Australian commercial catch records, and so that's been used in stock assessment as well. We also collect biological data because in a lot of countries they're tagging and releasing all the fish, and the information we've got from the tagging program has been really useful in showing where striped marlin go, and they fan out from New Zealand, go east and west and north when they're not here, but generally don't leave the Southwest Pacific. So this is giving us an idea that this is a separate population or effectively a separate substock of striped marlin. But the genetics studies also help determine stock structure, and by collecting samples from the weigh station here, we've been able to show the particular New Zealand and Australian genetic structure is different from other areas in the Eastern Pacific and in the Northern Pacific. So there's probably 4 separate populations of striped marlin around the Pacific Ocean. And there's possibly a little bit of mixing. The genetics also showed some mixing from Western Australia to Eastern Australia and New Zealand, so that's kind of interesting. But there's not much difference between the New Zealand and Australian striped marlin because they mix in the Coral Sea, which is a big spawning area for a lot of billfish, swordfish and marlin. And also we were doing ageing. We were collecting spine samples from the weigh stations here and counting the growth rings like a tree growth ring in the dorsal spines, and determining the age of striped marlin is quite useful in the stock assessments and as well. But that tended to underestimate the age quite a bit. They weren't always annual rings, it would seem. And there was a problem that, anyway, there were problems with that method. So yeah, there's quite a lot of support from the recreational sector to do their bit in helping to manage. They took some responsibility because it was a recreational-only fishery. They took some responsibility for collecting the information that would help in the management of striped marlin, not just in New Zealand, but in the wider Southwest Pacific.
Yeah, because obviously everything we do down here has a flow-on effect to other areas because marlin aren't just hanging out in New Zealand all year round.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and everyone's doing those voluntarily as well. They're going out and they're tagging fish and reporting recaptures and filling out logbooks for the billfish logbook program and doing their bit to ensure that they're contributing to the conservation and management of marlin.
People are genuinely interested in what's going on. They don't know. They want to learn about the fish and they want to learn about the fishery. And if you think about how marlin fishing works, you spend an awful lot of time driving around the ocean with very little happening. You're just scanning the horizon, looking for signs, looking for something. You always see amazing stuff out there, but gives you plenty of time to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and why you like doing it, and how it could be better in the future.
And the clubs have rules for contests and things that help encourage tag and release. And
yeah, most clubs, their rules favour tag and release in tournaments, so when you get a lot of boats out there and possibility of catching quite a lot of fish, their rules encourage people to tag and release rather than to weigh fish unless they're unusually large or particularly rare, sort of something that you don't get very often. So, yeah.
So that, are those the billfish logbook program and the tagging data, so that all feeds into the stock assessment of striped marlin?
yeah, it was used in the 2024 and 2025 stock assessments for striped marlin for the Southwest Pacific. The 2024 one was a bit underdone and wasn't accepted by the Science Committee for the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. And there were two models used in 2025, and the New Zealand catch per unit effort, the logbook and the charter boat catch information was one of the data sets that they used to train the model to show the trend in abundance over time, which has declined to a state where the stock is overfished, but current catches, they believe that overfishing is not continuing to occur. So there's a gradual rebuild in the last few years of striped marlin, according to the model. But we'll wait and see, I guess.
Yeah. And that non-commercial data is an important contribution to the
it's hugely important
to the stock assessment.
Yeah, they use the Taiwanese and Japanese longline data, which is obviously spread much wider than our localised fishery here. But they catch a lot of small juvenile marlin. They're fishing in the tropics, subtropics, where the juveniles hang out. We don't get them here. We get mature fish, and in New Zealand we get the largest fish as well. So you would think that monitoring the largest, oldest part of the population would be the first part of the population that would be affected by overfishing, in that the big ones weren't coming here anymore. And that's what we've seen in the last 2 years, is quite a decline in the average weight of striped marlin caught in the recreational fishery here. And in fact, for the first time in 2025, was the first year that the average weight of landed marlin in New Zealand was less than 90 kilos.
Okay, and we can see that in the records that are kept by clubs and New Zealand Sport Fishing Council, that change in weight and average weight caught over time of striped marlin.
Yeah, and it's an indicator of what's happening in the wider fishery. And there can be some seasonal, annual variation in that. And you get a warm season and there's more small fish come in, and that drags the average weight down a bit. And we'll wait and see what happens this.
Most years, the fish on the west coast of the North Island are a lot larger than the fish on the east coast. And this year there was a lot of small fish on the west coast. It was quite unusual, very unusual.
A big west coast fishery this last year, but then there was the smallest average weight for in that whole time that we've been recording at the Sport Fishing Council.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty interesting, but I think a lot of the fish that would have come this side went that side for whatever reason.
Maybe it's a bit better over on the west coast.
There was fishing over there.
There was a lot of food over there, and they just turned left.
Got lost at the peak. So with all of that being said, and this the current proposals that the Fisheries New Zealand has tabled, if passed, will allow commercial longliners on monitored bottom longline vessels to land marlin that come up dead on board, and then they'd be able to sell them. How do you think? What are your thoughts on the proposal? Is that there is potential for it to go into the same situation as broadbill, potentially the Australian marlin fishery as well. What are your thoughts on the personal thoughts on the proposal, and where that could lead us?
Well, my personal opinion is that there's very, very few fish that commercial are not allowed to take now, and I don't think they should be allowed to take these ones.
I worry about the level of monitoring that you can do with cameras. I mean, you can't watch the whole fleet, the whole haul for all the boats all the time to determine. You're only going to be sampling you're going to do a sub-sample of the video and so they won't know whether the camera's on or not, or whether it's going to get monitored or not. And there's evidence, and there was a paper by Peter Davey that shows that marlin are quite good at storing lactic acid in their muscle, but it does take a while to get out of the muscle again. And so I noticed that the estimates of mortality rates that scientific observers on longliners were using was the fish was either dead or moribund. Moribund mean it was lying on its side and not responding. And they can do that, but not be dead. So they can look passive and lying on the surface, but they'll survive. And in a recreational boat, if you've got a tired marlin, you can tow it by the bill, hold it upright, tow it by the bill in the water for a few minutes and get oxygen back into the system, and they'll swim away. But I'm worried that there won't be a good distinction between a dead marlin and one that's just in this state of lactic acid, overload.
Yeah.
Well, there'll be an economic incentive for them to be moribund rather than than alive. So
And once you pull them on board, how do you get it on board? I mean, you've got to stick a gaff in. You assume that's how they're going to get them on board, and by the time you've done that, it's going to be, even if it kicks, it's still going to be dead, isn't it? So
I had friends that were in this fishery when it started, and they said to me quite clearly that at least 80% of the striped marlin come to the boat alive, but if they were allowed to land a dead bycatch, that percentage would go way down because they'd make sure it did.
Because there's that economic incentive.
Well,
that's
yeah,
been put on
and you
as
can't
well.
blame them. They're trying to make a living. I understand that. I think we shouldn't give them that chance to do that, manipulate that stuff.
Yeah. So there's the economic aspect of these proposals, but then there's also the wastage part. And I think you mentioned it briefly before. I can't remember what stage it was, but there was talk of potentially landing dead marlin and then giving fish away. Do you think that could potentially be an option, or do you think we just don't have the systems in place and we just should maintain it as a non-commercial fishery and just let waste go to the wayside? What's your... Because that comes up quite a lot. There's certain programs or distribution centres and the Kaika project, like it could go through there, but do you think that's
So
just
to
another
take
foot in
away
door?
the economic incentive to land more marlin, I suspect that the industry wouldn't bother icing fish and keeping them and dealing with them without some financial
And why would they?
incentive.
It's a big fish to store in your...
And you would think that that the only reason they would do that is because eventually they would be able to take that loophole and then expand it out to a commercial.
Just opening the door, but a little bit
Opening a
slower.
door. And
Yep.
I mean, and at 2013, when we were talking about they were talking about wastage of striped marlin, they were finning thousands and thousands of sharks and throwing the bodies away. I mean,
Utter nonsense.
The argument that the few marlin they were catching dead was terrible waste was a little bit insincere, I thought, at the time.
So because there was no economic value for the shark, but then clearly like the waste, it kind of counteracted
Yeah, there was economic value in the fin,
waste,
but
Fins are worth a lot, and they didn't take up much room, so
Yeah.
there's plenty of room for fins.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what kind of implications do you think there would be if, for example, the proposal was approved? Do you think that could have, I guess the latest stock assessment estimated that it could be in an overfish state? How do you think that would work with management and in terms of the larger scheme of how highly migratory species are managed in the West and Central Pacific?
there isn't an international quota for marlin, or most species. They don't have international quotas. The southern bluefin tuna is the exception. So as far as an international management goes, currently in the striped marlin stock assessment, they treat all longline caught marlin in New Zealand as dead. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't impact the stock assessment at all, I wouldn't think. And they only count the landed marlin that recreational fishes. They only include the landed fish from recreational fishes in the stock assessment as caught and dead, basically. So does that answer the question?
Yeah. So I guess it wouldn't really like influence the stock assessment so much, but in terms of a social impact in the long term, there could be that spatial conflict and overlap between fishes if because if commercial fishes did happen to start if a target fishery did start to grow, like if we're looking at what happened with the broadbill fishery, then fisher behaviour could potentially change. They'd move locations to go fishing, and it would have a bit more of an overlap with recreational fishers for marlin.
That's all conjecture, of course,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's probably a reasonable
But
speculation.
if we're basing it on
The Australian
happened with-
experience,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what happened there.
That's
Yeah.
the observation from what happens when the bycatch becomes more valuable than whatever else you're catching, or as valuable as whatever else you're catching. The incentives are there to be profitable, I guess, and they're struggling. I don't know how some of these longliners keep going sometimes. It's tough out there, but this isn't going to be the solution to their problems. The striped marlin, landing striped marlin, or any marlin, isn't going to make the tuna fishery profitable again. It's going to help cover costs, that's about it. And is that enough of an incentive to potentially affect the future of this sport fishery, New Zealand, which is world-class recreational fishery, attracts international anglers for the largest striped marlin in the world, and has economic spin-offs, particularly for rural areas where a lot of these clubs are based, in Bay of Plenty and Northland and west coast of the North Island, and Greymouth now. I mean, they're talking about the game fish fishery down there, and they're starting to see marlin in the top of the South Island.
Yeah, so no longer just an East Northland favoured
it's
fishery,
not.
it's all over now.
And why would you take the risk of putting all that in jeopardy? It's just crazy.
So if it was to be regulated as bycatch only, that would be written in legislation, and similar to swordfish, there would be a cap on, I'm assuming, is that what happened with swordfish? They put a cap on the amount?
No, the cap was through the Memorandum of Understanding. It was only an agreement, voluntary agreement sort of thing. There would have to be a discussion about the triggers that would make the Fisheries New Zealand take the next step and put a cap on or something like that. I mean, they've said they'll be monitoring, the take, and if it starts to increase or look like it's behaviour's changing, well, they'll have to take some other sort of action. But then, as we've seen, there's always workarounds to that, and it's certainly not in the current proposal to have any other restriction on landing of marlin.
Yeah. So if there were other management things that could be put in place as well, is there any improvements, I guess, to marlin? I think you mentioned before to not be importing any marlin into New Zealand, just removing the ability to.
That's how I'd handle it. Simple rules are the best ones, the easiest to enforce. I don't think they made any money by importing that Fijian fish. It certainly didn't last very long. But why have an opportunity to slip the old toe in the door? Just don't do it. There's no benefit to be gained. To me, that's what I'd do. And it's been done in overseas jurisdictions.
Yeah.
I don't see why, one species shouldn't be recreational only, one or two species.
Yeah, I guess it's cleaner and tidier and simpler to just maintain it as a non-commercial species, and there's money coming into the economy from recreational fishing, purchasing boats, petrol, all of that, and lots of non-commercial data that contributes like voluntarily as well. Do you think there's anything that we as recreational fishers, I guess, could be doing better, or could be, and the government could be doing better to improve our behaviours and potentially the fishery here in New Zealand?
I think Sports Fishing Council is doing a great job at the moment promoting safety at sea. I think that's one good thing. But you know, I've got a real long vested interest in tag and release, and to my way of thinking, if you're going to do it, you want to do a really good job of it. So I think we can do a better job educating anglers about actually the practical aspects of getting a fish alongside the boat. It doesn't have to be done in 5 minutes, it can be done in half an hour or an hour even. Keeping the fish from impacting the boat, getting it under control, keeping the boat moving ahead while you're tracing it so the fish will swim with you, getting a good tag shot. You know, you can't get a good tag shot while the fish is in mid-air and you're bloody flailing away at it. It's hard to keep tags in striped marlin long term. We've found that over the years, and it's the same all around the world. They're a difficult beast to tag and release successfully. So what we've got to do is a better job of actually putting the tags into them to start with. What do you reckon?
Yeah, and there's the nylon-headed tag now that has been used overseas. There's not a lot of information from New Zealand tagging program where we've had fish double tagged with both types of tags at the same time, and you know, there's some that come back with the nylon tag only and some that come back with the stainless steel tag only. But internationally they've had success with the nylon billfish tag. And so there may be an opportunity there to switch to that tag as it's a little bit easier to use than the stainless steel one.
So to be fair, the stainless ones worked really well on kingfish.
Yes.
Particularly well on sharks, and it's worked well on tuna, you know, up to now. So the jury's out. You know, I think if we do a lot better job of putting the tag in to start with, I think we'll get better tag retention rates. But it does seem that striped marlin are a particularly tricky critter to keep the tags in long term. And I think it's because they spend so much time up near the surface, and you get barnacles and gooseneck barnacles growing on the tags, and they're either dragged out through drag, or turtles and things are coming and trying to get the barnacles and pulling them out like that. We know the fish survive, you know, that argument's dead and buried. Satellite tagging has proven that if you hook a striped marlin in the mouth on a circle hook or a lure, and you let it go and it's not bleeding when you let it go and it's still swimming, you know, very high survival rate. So they don't just fall over and die. The odd one will probably get eaten by sharks, and we know that for a fact, that the odd fish do get taken because sat tags have been knocked off by sharks on one or two occasions, and we've only tagged a very small number with satellite tags, but by and large we know stripies are surviving if you tag and release them. So if we can keep the tag on there longer, we've got more chance of getting recaptures.
Yeah, we helped Tim Sippel, a PhD student, on his research project on striped marlin behaviour, movement and behaviour, and satellite tagged 34 striped marlin, and I think there was one that died the day after it was released, but that was eaten by a shark. We know it was eaten by a shark because it swallowed the tag, and it was dark at the surface and it was warm at 300 metres, and that's not normal. That's not how the ocean works. And eventually, after 2 weeks, the tag got spat out and it still worked. And there was another one that got eaten by a shark like 4 months later, when it was up in the Pacific. Same thing happened. So yeah, we do know that these either mako or white sharks are occasionally taking striped marlin. But otherwise, all of them survived, and there's a story about Tim tagging a striped marlin with a satellite tag off a small boat off Waihau Bay, and he saw the fish sort of turn up and start to sink, and it had a $7,000 satellite tag in it, and he jumped in the water and grabbed it by the bill and then hung on to the back of the boat, and they towed it for about 5 minutes behind the boat, and that fish survived and swam away, and tags came off 6 months later. So obviously, you know, there are these instances where it wasn't a dead fish, it was moribund or something like that. And more recently, the clubs in Bay of Islands, New Plymouth, and now in counties and Auckland, clubs are starting to purchase satellite tags to do their own research. They're putting their own money in, they're getting their own people to put the tags in. This is a good citizen science project run by the IGFA and Stanford University. And we've had some amazing results in recent times. Not 100% of the tags work or report all the time. They still work, but they probably just don't float. They get fouled, or maybe they get damaged or something like that. But anyway, there's a satellite tag here, which is the type that we used, Tim Sipple used on striped marlin back in the 2000s. And they're about $7,000 each. They've got a computer inside which stores information every minute on temperature, depth and light levels. It's got a light level sensor, and it's got a depth sensor, and it's got a communication port, and it's got a conductivity sensor, so it'll know when it's out of the water, so it won't try and transmit when it's underwater. They don't transmit when they're on the fish. So after a predetermined time, you can program the number of time. This happens to be an 8-month tag. It'll burn the pin, it'll corrode the pin that holds the tether on, and it'll float to the surface. And then when there's a satellite overhead, it'll pick up the signal and the data. But there isn't always satellites overhead. So you don't always get all the data off the tag unless you recover it, which doesn't happen, but they'll transmit for about 2 weeks, and then the data's analysed in a model to show the track of the fish and the depth and temperature profiles. And the good thing about these is you don't have to recapture the fish. With the game fish tags, we're getting recaptures where people are fishing.
Yeah.
And that's in New Zealand recreational fishing or international longline fishing. These will come off wherever and report from wherever. It's just a shame that they're not 100 times cheaper. And then we could put lots on. But yeah, there's ongoing proposals to put more of these out in New Zealand, and we're getting good results, and the New Zealand Marine Research Foundation is contributing and has contributed a lot over the years into the deployment of these tags in New Zealand.
And still learning a lot more,
yeah,
and new information about the New Zealand fishery as well.
That's right.
And the wider region.
Yes, last year we got the first ever striped marlin recorded that left the southwest Pacific, and it headed into the eastern Pacific and was about 500 miles southwest of Galapagos Islands when the tag came off. And it had been in that area for a while, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, so that was kind of a bit groundbreaking. So yeah, we're still learning more.
Yeah. So after all of this reflection, and we've looked back at kind of how we've been, where we've come from, and to the proposals today, do you guys have any any closing remarks and about the current proposals and how you feel about everything?
I think I've been pretty clear. This is at least the third time this has come up since I've been involved. And I think it's just you're getting new players all the time and they don't know the history of it. So I think the history is really important. And to me, this is a precious fishery, which is way too precious to risk. The potential gain, I think, is very, very small. It might be important for a small number of guys, but we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of other people who live in little places like this. This place we're in here now, it's a centre of social activity in this area, and it's the same, lots of other little places all around the north and throughout the country, down the west coast. Why would you risk all that? To me, it's crazy.
Yeah, the economy of the game fish fishery is really important to communities. Like here in Tutukaka, Whangarei Deep Sea Anglers Club, all the boats we've got out here, a lot of them are engaged in part because they're here in part because of the game fishing, and they would go somewhere else possibly if there wasn't a vibrant fishery. And the club members and the council have supported our projects and the research and are trying to do the right thing for the fishery, and they don't see any benefit in this at all. And our job, to some degree, is to reflect what our members want, what our club members want, what the Sport Fishing Council members want, and represent their views to government and to the commercial fishers who want to engage or change the rules, and even the minister. We've got to get the message through that this is not acceptable to our members, and we'll defend our rights to have a non-commercial fishery that was part of a negotiated solution a long time ago, and that negotiation should stand until we agree otherwise.